We're not just going to wake up one morning and topple the government because on a whim we want to be prime minister like the Conservatives. We want a good reason to do that. So coming back to what I was saying, this parliament does have the power to ask the government to produce documents, that's clear. And the only limit on that authority is the good judgment of this House, not the government's goodwill. And I don't think the government has a good reason not to produce the documents. This House was very clear on June 10th. It asked the government to provide a series of documents. Yes, perhaps there were a great many documents involved. Maybe that made it difficult, but what Parliament asked for was very clear, and the government did not respect it, which clearly is a matter that violates our privilege. And that's what we're bringing up today, and we want to ensure that the Speaker rules on this. The leader of the Bloc Québécois also discussed another aspect, the fact that the Conservative Party is using this motion to call into question the Auditor General. But let's be very clear.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly cut off the Quebecois here. There's a tweet from Andrew Scheer. I don't know how I can get this. Let's see if I can. There we go. Breaking RCMP say they are investigating Liberal slush fund. This was, I think, a couple days ago. Liberal insiders funneled taxpayers' money into their own businesses. Now Trudeau refuses to hand over all the evidence to the cops. Why the cover-up released the documents? The National Post. RCMP says there are ongoing investigations into the Green Slush Fund as House is ground to a halt. This has been going on for the past few days now, since last week. Trudeau and the Liberal government still refusing to hand over documents, and that's what we will be dealing with today in the House of Commons. This is going to be a fairly large issue because the government is not being honest here with everything. And now they're finally getting called out for it. There's actually some action being taken. The RCMP themselves are investigating this. I don't know how far this is going to go beyond just talks in the House of Commons and maybe an investigation or two. I highly doubt Trudeau will see any actual action in court or in the court of law, but who knows? We will see what happens.
Inquiry. The decision is not up to us. If the RCMP needs the documents, then it should get them. Maybe it doesn't need them for the inquiry. But if there has been corruption,
what happens?
If taxpayer money was misused, of course there should be an inquiry.
Well, taxpayers' money is constantly being misused, whether it's for Trudeau vacations or this quote-unquote carbon tax, this rebate that 8 out of 10 Canadians are supposedly getting, where it is applicable, if you can even get it. What a fucking lie and a half.
Sustainable technology business.
They're just acting like now all of a sudden money is being mishandled and taxpayer money is being misused.
Canada. In November 2022, whistleblowers stated that they had concerns about the management of public funds and human resources within SDTC. They reached out to the Office of the Auditor General, who stated that they should send the complaint to the Office of the Privy Council, which then received a 300-page document from the whistleblowers with allegations dating back to February 2022. On October 3rd, 2023, the Minister of Innovation indicated that he had asked Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton to prepare a report. And the report laid out
send Trudeau in jail until they hand it over. If only we lived in a world like that. I highly doubt Trudeau will face or see any legal action because of this. And if there is any sort of legal action that takes place, they'll probably just throw somebody else under the bus. There'll be a fall guy or a fall whoever, and it'll just get washed away very quickly, probably.
Plan was implemented. Then on November 1st, 2023, the AG's office announced that it would be carrying out an audit. An audit about how SDTC was funding sustainable development technologies.
Be a fall guy.
And the Auditor General finally ultimately published her audit on June 4th. And what the report said was that there are serious problems of governance in the fund, principally poor conflict of interest management and a complete lack of rigor in terms of the eligibility criteria. So yes, it's reasonable to think that there were problems and that it would be responsible to inquire deeply into the matter. But what really is facing us here now is that when Parliament looks at a situation like this and that it asks for documents to be produced, well, it's really not too much to ask for the government to respect the will of this House and that it produces the said documents. It's really very simple. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Avignon, Mrs. Matane-Matapédia. It's a pleasure to hear from someone in this House who offered such an excellent overview of the issue at hand. I'm very grateful for the way she has taken this matter seriously. Now, this motion says that the entire matter should be referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. What does my colleague think? Does she think that we should indeed wrap up the debate here and refer the matter to committee? The Honourable Member. I'd like to thank my colleague for her kind words. Yes, I concluded my speech by saying that the Auditor General has been very clear. We can easily imagine that funds were mismanaged and that there were other problems. And as I was saying, we've heard from a number of people on this at committee, the Ethics Committee. The Conservative Party was clear in its motion. It's asking for this to be referred to the Procedure Committee, not necessarily to address the actual problems that happened at SDTC, but instead to look at what happened with the production of documents. The member opposite said that she was pleased that I offered a good overview of the situation. But this is actually something that has to do with her government. So I'm continuing to wonder why the government is refusing to produce these documents. Is that what the Conservative Party is going to be debating at committee? Is it going to be debating the issue of production of documents when the House asks for them? I'm not sure, but we do need to address the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question of curiosity for my colleague. Would you simply ignore fraud and unethical behavior if you were the owner of a company, or would you launch an immediate investigation to get to the root of the problem so it could be addressed and stopped?
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane-Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this situation, it's very clear. No one would say, oh, let's let these problems go on without getting to the bottom of them. Our stance has been very clear on this since the beginning. If there is an inquiry needed, let's do it. Do we need to spend dozens of hours talking about this in the House rather than debating legislation before the House and making progress on that legislation? Our constituents expect us to move forward on legislation, so that's the real question.
For Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her intervention. I think she very clearly laid it out. that, in order for the House to act upon this matter, we do one day have to arrive at a vote. And I have heard Conservatives making the argument that they need to prosecute this case in debate, but so far through their speeches, I'm hearing the same talking points repeated again and again. There are no new ideas being advanced through debate, so I'm glad she acknowledged that. But my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable colleague is, there has been a lot of finger-pointing between Liberals and Conservatives today, and does my honourable colleague think that the Conservative arguments might have a little bit more legitimacy if their record during the Harper years weren't just as bad as the Liberals?
The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question. It's interesting that he is asking me this question because we sit on the Public Safety Committee together, and we spend most of our time in committee watching the Liberals and Conservatives blame each other for each and every issue under the sun related to public safety. So here we are trying to bring up constructive matters, trying to be constructive. I'm not here to blame any specific group or person for the misdeeds which occurred. That's not my role. What I am insisting on is that this Parliament called on the government to table documents. They did not do so, so clearly then it's the Liberal government's fault. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. The NDP tries to sit here and blame both sides, and at the end of the day, if they got into power, it would be an absolute nightmare. It would literally be the end of our country as we know it if the NDP ever actually got into power.
Working to block and jam up Parliament. They are taking hostage all members of Parliament in this place. So on the one hand, we have those Conservatives, and on the other hand, the Liberals are not doing anything to get us past this. Would my colleague agree that this contributes to making Parliament completely dysfunctional, and that it has been dysfunctional for 2 weeks? The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely agree with what my colleague just said. Here we are after 15 hours of debate on this question of privilege. Maybe the government prefers this debate on the question of privilege rather than debating its legislation and making progress on legislative priorities, because maybe this government is trying to buy itself some extra time. I'm not accusing anyone, but perhaps this long question of privilege is beneficial to both parties. Maybe they both prefer it this way. But is it essential to have this many hours of debate? One wonders.
Barry Springwater or Medante.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to my member down the Y here for her great words on this. I have a quote I would like to mention here on the floor of the House of Commons that came up during committee under hearings under this horrific scandal that we're hearing about with the SDTC, and I'd like to read this specifically, and I will quote it. I think the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation from being a public nightmare.
It should say something. It should be very telling about our current government when they are failing to produce documents pertaining to the SDTC. When our government is hiding documents that are being demanded in the House of Commons, and they are fucking running away, and they are hiding, and they are lying. This should be very telling to the people. If you voted Liberal in the past, you need to open your eyes and see this. Take it for what it is at face value. The government has been lying to you. The Liberal government has been lying to you for the past 9 years. It's time to get them out.
The Conservative Party might also want us to waste time here in the House rather than debating legislation before the House. So I struggle to understand the Conservative tactics at the moment. In fact, it makes me uncomfortable. The members for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert and Mille-Îles said similar things. That is, that we do need to get to the bottom of this, but do we need to jam up Parliament for hours and hours? Could we not just immediately send the matter to committee so that the committee can study it?
James Bay.
I was away
last week in Dublin at the European Security Council meetings, and I come back and I find that we're again playing these games of the Conservatives, and there's so much to be discussed in Dublin, and I believe my honourable colleague was there. Raised on songs and stories, heroes of renown, all the passing tales and glory that once was Dublin town. And I come back here to see this sort of gamesmanship, but I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, while the Europeans were talking about Ukraine, while they were talking about the climate crisis, while they were talking about Gaza, here we are in Canada with this dysfunctional, abusive party that's interfering with democracy. I'd like to get my honourable colleague's thoughts, and if she wanted to share a song from Dublin, I'd be more than happy to hear it.
Okay, after that little song and dance there, I don't know what the hell's going on, but if you guys seriously think, or if you are waiting for Jagmeet because he's waiting for his pension, that just exposes him as a person as well. He's putting himself before Canadians. He does not care about you. He only cares about his multi-million-dollar pension. And he's made that quite obvious when he lashed out at Canadians that were asking him questions, calling him a corrupt bastard, and when he lashed out at Pierre and tried to fight him in the House of Commons a couple weeks ago. Jagmeet doesn't care about you, and the Liberals have been lying to you. They are failing to produce documents in the House of Commons. They are hiding info purposely. They are lying to you. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not saying the Conservatives are these great heroes at the end of the day, but Jagmeet isn't great. I don't know why you think he's going to save Canada. And like I said, the Liberals have been destroying this country for the past 9 years. And it has been so blatant. When you look in your neighborhoods, you look in the crime rates in major cities, skyrocketing. Car theft skyrockets. The price of food, the price of gas, the price of literally just living has gone up so significantly in the past 9 years. I got nothing else to say.
Of the Liberal government's refusal to and failure to comply with a Conservative motion that was duly passed by the House in June. The House of Commons, as a collective, and members of Parliament as individuals, have a number of rights and immunities that are necessary in order to perform their work. These rights and immunities are integral to the work of parliamentarians and are required in order to protect members of Parliament as well as the authority and dignity of the House of Commons. Individual rights of members include freedom of speech in the House of Commons and committees, freedom from arrest in civil actions, exemptions from jury duty, exemption from being subpoenaed to attend court as a witness, freedom from obstruction, interference, and intimidation. Collective rights of the House of Commons include the right to discipline those found in breach of privilege or in contempt, and to remove members for misconduct, to regulate its own internal affairs, including its debates, agenda, and facilities, to maintain the attendance and service of its members, and to institute inquiries and demand papers. These rights are extremely important, and when the collective or individual rights of members of Parliament are violated, it is so serious that all other work must cease. The reason we are here today is because the Speaker of the House of Commons found that the Liberal government violated the collective rights of members by refusing to produce documents that the House of Commons had ordered. As I mentioned, the House enjoys the absolute and unfettered power, or it should, to order the production of documents that is not limited by statute. These powers are rooted in the Constitution Act of 1867 and the Parliament of Canada Act. Since the Speaker agreed with Conservatives that our rights as parliamentarians have been breached, all business of the House has ceased. There will be no debates of government bills and no debates on private members' bills because this issue is so important that it must take precedence over all other business, and because the Liberal government has refused to comply with the lawful order of the House of Commons.
Like,
for the benefit...
I don't think they're stressing this enough. The Liberal government is literally going against a lawful order from the House. This should be so telling of how they are and how they run as a party, and how corrupt they are. They are failing to produce documents under a lawful order.
This fund was established in 2001 by the Government of Canada to fund the development and demonstration of new technologies that promote sustainable development. This fund managed to run without controversy for many years. That is, until the Liberal government came to power and turned it into a green slush fund for their well-connected Liberal buddies. The trouble began when former Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains, and his Liberal colleagues handpicked the board members and chair who went on to spend almost $1 billion of taxpayer funds. This flagrant disregard for taxpayers' dollars and blatant corruption flew under the radar for many years. It was thanks to the works of Conservatives on various parliamentary committees, but especially the Industry and Technology Committee, that this scandal came to light and was fully investigated. In February of 2023, the allegations surrounding financial mismanagement and ethical lapses first came to light in the form of a complaint from a group of employees at the fund. The Government of Canada responded by conducting an internal investigation which found several issues with how the fund was managed. Parliamentary hearings also began at the same time. The Auditor General of Canada first began to look into these allegations a short while later in November 2023 and issued a damning report earlier this year. She found that there were 186 times where conflicts of interest occurred, meaning the board of directors and the chair handpicked where funding was going on. Some of that funding went to their own companies. The Auditor General took only a sampling of the funding and found that 82% of that sample were in conflict of interest, totaling $330 million. The Auditor General also found that SDTC did not follow conflict of interest policies in 90 separate cases, spending nearly $76 million on projects connected to the Liberals' friends appointed to run the fund, spending $59 million on projects that were not allowed or have been awarded any money, and spent $12 million on projects that were both a conflict of interest and ineligible for funding. In one instance, the handpicked chair of the fund gave a shocking $217,000 to her own company. Canadians at home might be wondering how this could possibly happen. How could the Liberal-appointed board of the SDTC misappropriate such a large amount of tax dollars? How could the board possibly have so many conflicts? I will explain. Every single dollar that is dispersed by the $1 billion Green Slush Fund has to be approved by the board of directors. The members of the board of directors would declare their conflicts when they happen to arise, and at the beginning of the meeting, those conflicts were declared. The trouble is that in many cases, a director would stay in the room, or in some cases, they would leave the room while members were voting to give funds to their own projects. This is, of course, a completely absurd way to run a fund and led to these members willfully and purposely enriching themselves and the value of their companies. One egregious example of this scenario is when member of the board, Andre Lise Metho, who runs a venture capital firm called Cycle Capital, received $114 million in grants from the Green Slush Fund while she was sitting on the board. Her company's value tripled during her time on the board at SDTC because the receipt of these funds lent an untold amount of legitimacy to her company. Another shocking tidbit from this example is that Cycle Capital's in-house paid lobbyist was none other than the Liberal Minister of the Environment. He lobbied the PMO and the Industry Department 25 times while he was the paid lobbyist for Cycle Capital. Ms. Metho then went on, after her time at SDTC, to become a board member at the Canada Infrastructure Bank, where she gave a handsome gift of $170 million in infrastructure bank money to a company owned by the chair of SDTC, Annette Verschuren. We will turn to Ms. Verschuren's conflicts, which are second shocking example of the corruption, that took place under this Liberal government's watch. Annette Verschuren was appointed to be the chair of the Green Slush Fund by former Minister of Industry Navdeep Bains after he removed the previous chair Jim Basili, given his public criticism of the Liberal government's privacy legislation. Mr. Baines proposed Annette Verschuren, an entrepreneur who was receiving SDTC funding through one of her companies, as a replacement. The Minister, the Prime Minister's office, and the Privy Council office were warned of the risks associated with appointing a chair with so many conflict of interest, and were told that the fund had never had a chair with interest in companies receiving funding from SDTC. In 2019, Minister Baines proceeded with the appointment of Ms. Verschuren, despite repeated warnings expressed to his office. Ms. Verschuren sat in and moved 2 motions to funnel $38.5 million out the door in COVID relief payments. These are payments that went out the door in contravention of the contribution agreements with the SDTC had with ISED or Industry Canada. Not only did $38.5 million inappropriately go out the door in these COVID relief payments, but $220,000 was funneled into her own company, a company in which she was the CEO, founder, majority shareholder, and sole director. She moved a motion and voted on sending $220,000 to her own company. Just recently, Ms. Verschuren was found guilty of breaking ethics laws by the Ethics Commissioner. In his report, the Ethics Commissioner stated that Ms. Verschuren, quote, improperly furthered the interest of the beneficiaries of SDTC funding to companies associated with those accelerators. These are just 2 examples of the shocking revelations that were uncovered by the Auditor General, the Ethics Commissioner, and my Conservative colleagues. 9 directors, according to the Auditor General, accounted for the 186 conflicts. I will remind members of this House that this fund had run well, by all accounts, until the Liberal government came into power and turned it into a slush fund. In fact, one of the whistleblowers who worked at the own company stated, and I will quote, "The true failure of this situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems..."
So, for example, if I test it right now,
Listen, I want to remind people that are joining us online to make sure that their microphones are in the mute position. And I know if they are having challenges, well, that's their problems.
All right, just had to switch over to a different feed there. Seems like somebody's getting some shit here for having their microphone on when they're not supposed to. Here we go.
Speaker, and I really appreciate everybody wanting to hear me from the top there. That means it must be really riveting and they're enjoying my words. I appreciate that. And to the Speaker, I would have loved the opportunity to start from the top, but I will continue on from my quote, which was again, and it's a great quote, everyone. This was right from the whistleblower who worked there. Quote, "The true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government." I'm sure they wanted to hear that a second time. "Whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point. What should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year." Another quote from the same committee that your Mr. Speaker was.
I honestly don't even want to imagine how many millions of tax dollars were wasted or misused or misallocated. Holy shit, man.
"They would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like SDTC in the public sphere." And I heard someone asking who said that. That was an employee who used to work at SDTC, who was at committee and said that under committee. They're quoted. So that's right out of the committee meeting. I'm sorry, it gives me 5 more seconds. I've got lots more to go, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking forward to continuing after QP.
The honourable member will have the opportunity to use the rest of his speech. I think there'll be about 8 minutes remaining in his time. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Vancouver Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a problem. 30 years ago, polio was eradicated in the Americas. 2 generations of children were made safe from the death and disability that polio wrought. Now we must re-wage this battle. We're seeing long eradicated diseases make a comeback, in most part due to the disinformation that fuels anti-vax communities. As a physician, I watch in despair as conditions like measles and rubella trickle back into our homes and classrooms, bringing with them chronic morbidity, death, and disability to a new generation. Canada was the first country to invest in the fight to end polio worldwide. Our objective was to totally eliminate the disease globally. Today, polio is on the rise again, and with global travel, it will become a pandemic. Colleagues, Canada must resume our global leadership. Our $151 million pledge over 3 years to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative to immunize 370 million children is a start. The world's children deserve no less.
The honourable member for York Simcoe.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 1 year since my Conservative bill C-280 passed the House of Commons. This important bill will ensure that Canada's fresh fruit and vegetable growers are paid for the food they grow, and it will save Canadians money. But this Prime Minister's hand-picked senators have held up the bill for months, and now some are actively looking to defeat it. In committee, one senator even told produce farmers, "Tough luck, the whole system is crooked, but life's not fair, and you're just going to have to deal with it." Talk about out of touch, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-280 supports farmers, protects our food security, promotes cross-border trade, and practically every MP voted for it. But Liberal-appointed senators want to ignore the will of the House and side with big banks instead. They need to get their act together, stand with common-sense Conservatives in support of C-280 and our farmers, and bring it home.
The honourable member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, as the leaves turn to their brilliant autumn hues, it reminds us that Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest is here once again. I'm thrilled to invite everyone to the 56th annual celebration of this iconic festival, running until October 19th. For over 5 decades, Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest has been a cornerstone of our region. It's the largest Bavarian festival in North America. From the official keg tapping ceremony to delicious German cuisine served by local clubs and restaurants to vibrant cultural events, each day there's something for everyone. Our Thanksgiving Day Parade will be broadcast nationwide, and throughout the festival there'll be family fun for all ages, including activities for children and a free family breakfast. We also host a community food drive. So whether you're dancing a polka, enjoying a traditional meal, or participating in family fun, this festival brings us together in camaraderie, culture, and celebration. So thanks to the organizers and volunteers whose dedication keep the spirit of Oktoberfest alive and thriving. Enjoy Oktoberfest. Prost.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi to Miscamanque. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark the creation of a very special ribbon in my region, the Nathan Ribbon. At the end of August 2024, Nathan Makamo, a young teenager, was hit by a car while crossing the road after getting off a school bus. As the father of 2 teenagers, my thoughts are with the family affected by this tragedy. And that's why I'm wearing this ribbon today. Yellow and black, the color...
Yeah, just an Oktoberfest commercial. Go drink lots of beer and get hammered.
...created by Otobo Smau, a company in my region. I salute the leadership of Pierre and Nicolas Mao. Every day, these big yellow and black buses are on our roads with the most precious assets, our children. Every day, school bus drivers witness actions that can endanger the lives of our children. This ribbon is a way of honoring Nathan's memory, and I ask you all to obtain one. It's a way to remind everyone of our responsibility. And do not forget that when the lights are flashing, we stop. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Humber River, Black Creek.
It is my great pleasure to acknowledge...
All right, Greg's in the house. We know that question period is coming up soon, roughly 10 minutes away.
is truly making a difference for those affected by serious blood disorders. The challenges posed by inherited conditions like sickle cell disease, thalassemia, hemophilia, aplastic anemia, and Diamond-Blackfan anemia are significant. Yet the commitment of this network to raise awareness, advocate for timely diagnosis, and promote comprehensive treatments is inspiring. Global Action Network for Sickle Cell and Other Inherited Blood Disorders will be holding a reception tomorrow evening. I would like to invite all of my honourable colleagues to meet with professionals, advocates, and individuals living with inherited blood disorders tomorrow evening in the Valor Building. Our support to this cause is invaluable. Thank you very much.
The honourable member from Kildonan St. Paul.
1 year ago today, Jews experienced the worst attack since the Holocaust. Innocent Jews were barbarically slaughtered. Women's bodies were broken from vicious rape. Children tortured in front of their parents. People burned alive and mutilated. 1,200 Jewish lives were horrifically ended that day. And 101 hostages continue to be held by Hamas terrorists responsible for this massacre. And since then, unbelievably, right here in Canada, Jews have experienced relentless anti-Semitism targeting Jewish businesses, schools, retirement homes, and synagogues. It is a national failure that Jews no longer feel safe in this country. And yet Jewish people continue to fight. Their resolve is stronger than ever. Conservatives stand with them and with the State of Israel. We condemn the anti-Zionist hatred and the spineless Canadian leaders who have allowed it to take root here at home. Today we pray for Israel and for the victory of Western democratic values. Am Israel Chai.
The honourable member from Toronto Danforth.
Today marks one awful year since a Hamas terrorist attack on Israel that took the lives of 1,200 people, including 8 Canadians. Also on that day, more than 240 hostages from dozens of countries were taken hostage to Gaza. Over 100 remain there today. Let us all recommit today to ensure that they can soon rejoin their loved ones. The killing, the sexual violence, the taking of hostages on October 7th marks the largest atrocity on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It broke our hearts. But as Leonard Cohen said, there's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. And today, we must come together to find and form that light. Hirsch's mother said that in a competition of pain, there are no winners. And there's been so much pain, and there have been no winners. But today, we can hold space to mourn those who were killed on October 7th. And we pray and we work for peace. We pray and we work for the release of the hostages. Let that be our light.
The honourable member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the important work that leading arthritis organizations are doing across Canada. This week they are on Parliament Hill raising awareness about the challenges faced by more than 6 million Canadians living with arthritis. They embody the spirit of advocacy that is so vital in the fight against this pervasive disease. Often misunderstood as an ailment of older people, half of the people affected by arthritis are under 65, including around 25,000 children. Arthritis is the most common chronic disease in Canada. It is estimated to rise to 9 million Canadians, or 1 in 4, by 2040. The debilitating pain limits mobility, hampers productivity, and sadly can lead to isolation and impact on mental health. Mr. Speaker, there is no cure to arthritis, but together we can make a difference and help improve the lives of those suffering from it by working towards building a healthier future for all Canadians, which includes reducing wait times for diagnosis and treatment and improving access to care. To Arthritis Society Canada and all the partners, thank you for your advocacy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Portneuf, Jacques Cartier. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc has issued an ultimatum for October 29th in an attempt to intimidate its friend, the Liberal Prime Minister. On October 30th, the day before Halloween, nothing will change. The government will remain in place. It's all the makeup and illusions we've come to expect from the Bloc. The Bloc has abandoned Quebec. It has voted more than 180 times to keep the most expensive government in power. A government that trampled Quebec's jurisdiction. A government that broke immigration, the Bloc voted for $500 billion in inflationary spending, which added 100,000 public servants and doubled the federal debt. And that's why, amongst other things, it's called the Bloc Liberal Coalition. It claims to defend Quebecers, but it can't even defend the regions that will suffer from the Caribou Decree. The Bloc is a terrible negotiator. It got nothing for its vote that keeps the Liberals in power. Quebec friends, a word of advice. Beware of the Bloc Québécois.
The honourable member from Waterloo.
In Canada, October is also known as Latin American Heritage Month. We must applaud the late Senator Berga for making this recognition possible. Today I rise to thank the organizers, publishers, writers, artists, volunteers, alongside representatives of Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Spain, Panama, Peru, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay for contributing to Philibro Canada 2024. Language is essential to any culture, and this book fair is one of the most important forums for the promotion of Spanish literature while highlighting the importance of Hispanic culture in Canada. I would especially like to applaud Silvia Alfaro, Ramon Sepulveda, and Gabriela Lopez and their team, including Clara Mejia, as it was an honor to host the 6th Ibero-American Book Fair on Parliament Hill, where hundreds gathered to share, promote, and create a much-needed camaraderie in emerging cultural communities. Diversity is Canada's strength, and I hope even more people join us next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Barrie Springwater, Oro Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost, crime, or corruption. We know that this Liberal government took a legitimate federal foundation called Sustainable Development Technology Canada and turned it into a green slush fund for their well-connected Liberal cronies and buddies. These Liberal insiders who were appointed to the board of SDTC gave nearly $400 million in tax dollars to their own companies and friends, at a time when Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. Conservatives passed a motion ordering the Liberal government to assist the ongoing RCMP investigation by handing over all documents related to this scandal. The Speaker has found that the Liberal government has breached this order, which has now ground Parliament to a halt. Canadians do not have confidence in this Prime Minister, who has previously been found guilty of breaking ethics laws twice. It is time to axe the tax, cut the corporate corruption.
How many times is he gonna break ethics laws? What is going on in our country? What the actual hell?
Till.
1 year ago today, Hamas committed...
Like, this is a joke. This is a fucking joke, man. We are getting looked at like the sad, pathetic, former shell of what we used to be. Our Prime Minister and our government can't even get their shit together. They can't even bring forth documents under a lawful order. They are hiding from the entire world right now.
Through us the torch to guard against. In that, we must know that the promise of Canada does not self-perpetuate. We must fight for it every day. That means rejecting feckless leaders who placate lawless mobs within Canada's streets. And it means defending the right of Israel, a democratic nation, to protect itself from the same terror groups that also seek death to our Canadian way of life. Remember, colleagues, that peace never comes through appeasement. It only comes through strength. Am Israel High.
The Honourable Member for Orléans. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Minister of Housing and I had the great pleasure of inaugurating the new NATO Diana Centre in Halifax. The NATO Diana Centre will help develop dual-use technologies that address security and defence challenges. This initiative places Canada at the centre of NATO's efforts to maintain its technological lead and preserve peace and security. This investment of over $26 million is also a demonstration of Canada's dedication to the NATO alliance and to our defence. I'd like to thank Major General Pay Payton, who will be the NATO Diana Deputy Military Director for North America. I'd like to thank all of my caucus colleagues.
Yeah, we have a lot of issues here in Canada. Instead of funding stuff here in Canada. We continue to send millions of dollars over to whatever, Ukraine or Gaza or Israel.
The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Healthcare workers, the Band Council and family members of Wikwimkung unceded territory are working exceptionally hard to replace their aging long-term care home. Built in 1972, the current elders' home is at capacity and no longer meets current regulations. Detailed plans have already been designed for an expanded facility, but they need further investments to ensure that elders can age with dignity close to family and friends, as the license is set to expire June 2025. The community has secured $49 million for this project and need Indigenous Services Canada to cover the funding shortfall. The existing facility must not close without having another one ready to transition current residents within the community. Failure to do so would re-traumatize residents who are residential school survivors and reduce their ability to pass on their historical knowledge and teachings. Time is of the essence. Indigenous Services Canada and the Finance Minister must ensure the $20 million requested is advanced for this new elders' home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Loire. Today, October 7th, marks the end of a year of horror, a year since Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,200 people in Israel, a year since Hamas took nearly 250 hostages, including dozens of presumed alive but still missing, a year since the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. On October 7th, Hamas perpetrated acts of unprecedented barbarity, plunging the Middle East into a spiral of violence whose end is hard to see. The world has every right to deplore this spiral of violence, but we have no right to forget the victims of October 7th, innocent men, women, and children. We must not forget the hostages and their families who can no longer rest. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I reiterate my solidarity with the entire Jewish community who deserves to live through this tragic commemoration in dignity and safety.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
A year ago, the Jewish people were savagely attacked in the deadliest act of sadistic barbarism since the Holocaust. Over 1,200 souls were raped, murdered, and taken hostage by a radical death cult backed by the clerical regime in Tehran, 7 Canadians among them. 101 remain in the grips of terrorists, hidden in the tunnels of hell. 1 year ago, the glory of living a peaceful and safe existence in this country as a Jew ended. They have placated the mob of woke radicals and the anti-Zionist Jew haters that reign free in our streets and reward terror. We used to be a country that was clear and unequivocal about eradicating anti-Semitism here and destroying terrorists without conditions everywhere. For those who remain captive, those waiting for their loved ones to come home, for those who never made it back, we remember you. And for those horrified at the state of our country, we will fight to restore the Canada you know and love, even when they won't.
Yeah.
The honourable member from Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago, over 1,000 Israelis were killed in a terror attack by Hamas. Since then, Netanyahu's regime has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and victimized hundreds of thousands in the region. As long as this continues, so too does the harm in our Canadian communities. Over the past year, our local synagogue has had to ask police for support during Shabbat and this past weekend during Rosh Hashanah. Palestinian Canadians who have lost entire generations of family members are afraid to grieve openly and continue to be targeted for their heritage. This is unacceptable. No matter your identity, you deserve to feel safe and to be able to grieve in our country. This is not a political issue, this is a humanity issue. And if members in this House continue to make this tragic loss a partisan issue, we risk losing a part of our own humanity. Today is the horrific anniversary for Jewish and Palestinian Canadians alike. Today is a day of grief, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions.
Alrighty, here we go. Question period has started.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost, the crime, or the corruption. The Liberals have paralyzed this Parliament by refusing to respect your judgment, to produce the documents and give them to the RCMP. This is a $400 million scandal. Liberal-appointed executives gave money to their own businesses. 186 conflicts of interest, according to the Auditor General. Will the Liberals respect your judgment and give the evidence to the RCMP so we can get back to work? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying is not true. This matter has been referred to the committee for further study. Will the Conservatives decide to follow that example?
The NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, the crime, or the corruption. The Prime Minister has ground the work of Parliament to a halt by refusing to respect your ruling. The government must hand over evidence to the police concerning the $400 million spending scandal that saw Liberal appointees give millions of dollars to their own companies. Wow. The Auditor General says there's 186 conflicts of interest in this scandal. Will the Prime Minister end the cover-up, respect your ruling, give the police the information so that we can have accountability and get back to work?
The Honourable Leader of the House in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's demonstrably false what the Leader of the Opposition is saying, because your ruling was to send this matter to the House and Procedure Affairs Committee for more study. And so, in fact, it is only the Conservatives that are now obstructing their own obstruction, because they don't want this to go to committee, because it would demonstrate that they are trying to upend charter rights and override police independence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Parliament can get back to work this minute if the government will just hand over the evidence to the police about this $400 million Liberal spending scandal.
$400 million.
Everybody's going to lose their charter rights if the police get evidence into this $400 million Liberal spending scandal. No, what will happen is that the Liberal nominees and appointees who engaged in 186 conflicts of interest to stuff their own pockets will be held criminally accountable, and Canadians might get their money back. Why won't they hand over the evidence, respect your ruling, so we can get back to work around here?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, what's interesting about this is that there's actually proof that the Leader of the Opposition is saying is false, because in your ruling you said this matter needs to go to the House and Procedures Affairs Committee for further study, because this is unprecedented in what the Conservatives are putting forward, because, as the RCMP mentioned, it would upend charter rights and it would blur the lines between judicial and legislative independence. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives can follow your ruling and we can all go back to work, which is what exactly the Canadians want us to do. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all members for being very patient and not taking the microphone. I'm going to remind the Honourable Member from South Shore St. Margaret's to do the same. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
A year ago today, a sadistic and genocidal death cult, Hamas, carried out the biggest attack on Jews since the Holocaust and has 100 more hostages. Bring them home. Here at home, though, our Jewish friends and neighbors have been doubly victimized as anti-Semitic mobs take to the streets shouting, "From Palestine to Lebanon, Israel will soon be gone. There's only one solution: intifada, revolution." Will the government clearly and unequivocally condemn these genocidal chants from hateful mobs on our streets?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Judy Weinstein, Vivian Silver, Ben Mizrachi, Netta Epstein, Shir Georgi, Alexandre Luc, Idal Vital Kaploun, Tiferet Lapido. May their memories be a blessing. It was my honor to have met with their families here at home and in Israel. And on the anniversaries of Hamas' horrific attacks, my promise to their loved ones is the following. Year after year, Canadians will honor their memories, and to Jewish people, we stand with you. We won't relent until the last hostage returns home.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
She does relent every single day, just like her leader. I asked a very simple question. Mobs have taken to the streets in front of Jewish homes, hospitals, and businesses to shout anti-Semitic hate slogans. I quoted a number of them and invited the minister to rise to her feet and specifically condemn them, to stand with Jews against the anti-Semitism that has been allowed to proliferate on our streets. So once again, will she condemn these anti-Semitic chants?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, today is October 7th, an anniversary of a horrific attack on Jews. 1,200 people killed, over 200 people taken hostage. Our solidarity is with Jews in Israel and with Jewish people in Canada and right around the world. What we stand up against absolutely is the amount of hatred that we have seen in this country and countries around the world, where people will target Jewish Canadian schools, daycares, and synagogues for the acts that they have a problem with on another side of the world. We are better than that in this country. We need to stand up against that kind of hatred in support of Jewish people and in place of all people who defend their ability to worship how and whom they choose.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, seniors came here to the Hill last week to ask for old age security to be increased by 10%.
Yeah, it is political theater. Political theater at its finest. What's up, Sean? How's it going?
And elected officials voted unanimously for it. We just need the government to grant royal recommendation to C-319, but it doesn't want to because it says that that's not how things are done. We are bringing up seniors' living conditions. We're bringing up democracy. And meanwhile, the government keeps talking about procedure. When will they stop dragging their feet and grant royal recommendation? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, I have visited with many seniors in my riding over the weekend. I have dialogued with them, and knowing my honourable colleague, I'm sure that he has been very clear with seniors. For example, the fact that he is opposed to lowering retirement age to 65. The Bloc Québécois voted against that.
All right, Thomas, gonna put you on a little timeout there, buddy. How about you just slow your roll a bit there, all right? Holy fuck, man.
For thousands of seniors in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois voted against that. The member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, seniors are mobilizing to increase their pensions. 79% of people agree. All parties voted for it at committee, and yet the Liberals just keep talking to us about procedural problems. And the same thing applies to the issue of supply management. Farmers want C-282. All of the parties voted for it, but it's stuck in the Senate, and once again the Liberals are refusing to do anything. In both cases, the Liberals are talking to us about procedural problems, but is the real problem that the Liberals just don't care?
Culture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague is well aware that it was our party that initiated the supply management programme. It's our party that supported the supply management programme through its history. It's a very successful programme, and we supported 282, and we urge the other place to move on this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. L'honorable député de New Westminster.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. Mr. Speaker, the right to housing is critical, but the housing crisis has only gotten worse since the Liberals came to power. The Liberals and the Conservatives before them sold more than 1 million affordable housing units to rich developers so that they could get rich at the expense of families. The Liberals let rents double. Meanwhile, the Conservatives helped their real estate donors get rich. Both of these parties provoked the housing crisis. Why do they want families to pay the price for what they've done? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, it's the Canadian government at its finest. All they do is ask questions, deflect, word salad this, bullshit that. Yeah, producing are not producing the documents under a lawful order is pretty much, yeah, obstruction of justice, especially when the House itself has called for it. I don't know much about law. I'm not into that. But when it's under a lawful order, yeah, you should probably produce the documents. Our government is lying. They are hiding these documents. And it's for everybody to see. It's on the international stage for everybody to see. Our government lying and being slimy as fuck.
Home for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities and broke it. To make matters worse, Indigenous people are still reeling from the Conservatives' cuts to housing until this day. Liberals break promises, Conservatives gut and cut, Indigenous people pay the price. When will this government finally act to build the homes Indigenous people desperately need?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, it's not scripted. They just ask a lot of the same questions over and over and over again, so they just slightly change their answers, or they make a slightly different paragraph in their spare time. I don't know.
9 years. Now, if we had built on the record of the Conservative leader with 6 affordable apartments in his entire mandate, we would be a long way from what is needed for Indigenous Canadians in 2024. In addition to that, as I said in French, the Conservative leader doesn't want to support seniors and Indigenous Canadians when they live in low-rent housing because he believes it encourages a sort of Soviet-style housing conditions.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
I gave the Foreign Affairs Minister 2 opportunities to condemn the increasingly common and terrifying anti-Semitic chants we hear in the streets. Israel will soon be gone. There is only one solution, intifada, revolution. Twice she refused to condemn those remarks. She continues to pander to Hamas supporters in the Liberal Party as part of her leadership campaign rather than doing her job. So I'll give her another chance. Will she publicly support Israel's right to retaliate against the tyrants of Tehran and the terrorists in Hezbollah and Hamas to protect itself? Yes or no?
Yeah.
If we don't do politics about...
Oh, come on, Greg.
I just want to encourage all members to ensure
light slap on the wrist, huh? Okay.
The end of question period, but just to caution all members to please be judicious in their words. The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, if there's a day where we don't do politics about people's lives being taken or people being killed, it's today.
Why is your government playing both sides then?
We are all against any form of anti-Semitism, I hope, in this House. Any form of discrimination. And I really hope that my colleague in front will apologize.
Right on.
Political theater at its finest.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
If there was ever a day when we needed a government to stand up for what was right, this would be that day.
Exactly, and here they are playing both sides.
This government has sought to divide Canadians by saying one thing to one group and precisely the opposite to another group. And here in this House, remaining radio silent on condemning anti-Semitic chants and on supporting Israel's right to truly defend itself by retaliating against the terrorists and tyrants. Why won't she do the right thing and stand beside the Jewish people today?
Yeah. She needs to apologize for being liberal. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago in the Middle East, peace was broken by a violent terrorist attack by Hamas. On this side of the ocean, we deserve to do better in terms of the protests that we articulate. it needs to be peaceful. What that means is you don't go out on the streets and target a daycare. You don't go out on the streets and target a community center. You don't go out on the streets and target a synagogue. Our resolve to fight anti-Semitism is strong. It has been strong since this parliament started when we outlawed the willful promotion of anti-Semitism. It is even stronger now when we're advocating for more strict penalties, which that party opposes.
Yeah, the Liberal government has been playing both sides from the beginning. I bet all of the members on the Liberal side aren't even on the same page when it comes to what is happening over there.
This NDP Liberal government obstructed a lawful order of this House by not turning over the evidence in the $400 million corruption scandal. It has this Parliament paralyzed and unable to deal with the misery and chaos that's been created after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. And taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for the cover-up of this latest corruption scandal. So will they simply provide the evidence to the police so that this House can get back to its work of holding them accountable?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that member is again false in his statements, because what you clearly ruled was that this matter should be sent to committee for further study, because it is the first time in this Parliament's history that it is taking its extraordinary powers and abusing them in such an egregious way. The issue with which the honourable member is discussing has been dealt with by this government, but it's up to the Conservatives to stop obstructing their own obstruction so that we can all get back to the important work of governing for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Vita Lakes.
Only a Liberal would get up in this place and say that the majority of members in this House who were democratically elected, exercising powers that are legally bestowed upon this Parliament, are somehow infringing upon this government's constitutional right to not be investigated by the RCMP for their own corruption. It's absolutely unbelievable. Over 186 conflicts of interest, $400 million lining the pockets of well-connected Liberal insiders, while Canadians are lined up at food banks in record numbers. So we want to know if this government's expecting the NDP to bail them out and stop us from holding them to account.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear about two things. In terms of a criminal prosecution, the way it normally unfolds is the police seek a search warrant from a judge. The judge evaluates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Charter of Interest that at stake in getting those documents, something of which that party cares not. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we also have this fundamental premise. It's called police independence. We safeguard it in Canada. You know who doesn't safeguard it? Authoritarian regimes. I guess the Leader of the Opposition and his minions are sharing their blatant observation and favoritism towards authoritarian tactics in this House.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, history will remember that this government is corrupt. The latest example is the Green Fund, which ultimately became a slush fund for this government's buddies. The Auditor General was scathing. The leaders of the fund gave money to their own companies 186 times. That is corruption that deserves a police investigation. My question is very clear. When will the Liberals comply with your ruling to give the documents to the police so they can do their work? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague, for Louis Saint Laurent, but only the Conservatives could manage to filibuster their own motion. I've never seen anything like it. Mr. Speaker, we said that we would take decisive action, and that's what we've done. We got to the bottom of things. There have been 4 independent reports. The CEO has stepped down. The board stepped down. The fund is now under the National Research Council. We believe that we...
Trudeau won't condemn that action because they want to act like our immigration policies are in great standing right now, when time and time again, stuff like that continues to happen. So you'll never see them come out and actually speak on that, but they will just condemn any sort of war or militarized action just in its entirety.
And we know that people here at the table are saying that the RCMP does not have all the documents. The only way to ensure that the RCMP can properly do its work is to ensure that the Liberals actually provide all of the documents.
Yep, it's the Chihuahua.
Stand up and do his duty? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker.
Just be happy they're speaking in French right now. You don't actually have to hear his voice.
Independent reports. Not one, four. 4 independent reports were produced. And the RCMP commissioner has said in an open letter that the RCMP had access to all the documents. So in the interest of Canadians and democracy, in the interests of our work here in the House, we are asking the Conservatives to stop filibustering their own motion and to work hard in the interest of all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to come back to C-282, a bill that protects supply management. We were wondering why 2 senators, Peter Beam and Peter Harder, were blocking the bill in the Senate. Well, now we know why. Because of Dimitri Soudas, former advisor to Stephen Harper. He said about the 2 senators that they are 2 former deputy ministers who tried many times to convince Stephen Harper to abandon the supply management program. I was there, he said. So these 2 Liberal-appointed senators are trying to topple something that was voted in this House. Is that acceptable for the Liberals?
Alimentaire.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Yeah. L'honorable ministre Revenu National.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je peux vous assurer.
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. I assure you that all Liberals here support supply management, just like our Bloc Québécois colleagues. But the Conservatives, well, I can't say the same for them. We have had a conversation with the Senate. We are talking with senators, just like my colleague from the Bloc, but the Senate is independent. These senators are independent. They need to do their work, and we expect them to do their work diligently. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. What's happening in the Senate is very serious. These 2 non-elected officials are attacking our farmers and also the very basis of our democracy. This is where we vote in legislation in this House. If Peter Beam and Peter Harder don't agree with this legislation and want different legislation, then they should have the courage to step down from the Senate and get elected. This is where democracy has its seat. Our people's representatives are here and they supported C-282. So will the government ensure that these 2 senators respect democracy? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same question, same answer. My colleague gave a very clear answer. We support supply management. And in fact, the Liberal Party, a Liberal government, brought in supply management several decades ago. We have always been very consistent in our position, unlike some members in this House. We have defended supply management even when President Trump wanted to get rid of it and when the Conservatives were asking us to capitulate. Before giving the floor to the member for Berthier-Masquinongé, I would like to invite the members for Mirabel and Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier to ensure that they do not speak until they receive the floor from the Speaker. The Honourable Member. Well, Mr. Speaker, adopting C-282 will be critical for dairy, poultry, and egg producers. That's not according to me. That's what it says in an open letter from the milk, eggs, chicken, and turkey producers of Canada, which just shows that when the Bloc Québécois supports Quebec's interests, sometimes it's such a great idea that all of Canada wants the same thing. Quebec and Canadian farmers want the same thing. This is good for everyone. So will all of the parties ask the Senate to stop blocking this consensus and pass C-282? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I entirely agree with my colleague from the Bloc Québécois. We support the supply management.
I don't even think the Bloc will know why they're a federal party. Like, they're just a complete joke.
The bill is in the Senate at the moment, and we expect senators to deal with it diligently.
The honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals aren't worth the cost, crime or corruption. You, Mr. Speaker, ruled that this NDP Liberal government must hand over documents relating to what the Auditor General found was a $400 million fraud with 186 conflicts of interest. This is at a time when Canadians are having trouble heating, eating, and housing themselves. When will this Liberal government end the cover-up and provide those documents to the RCMP as they should?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I'm going to appeal to that member as a former Crown prosecutor. He knows something about the independence of our institutions. When the police take action, they do so without political direction or manipulation. The police make decisions. They then go to a court and ask for a search warrant. It is judicially authorized because it has charter protections. That's something that member used to be familiar with. I just wish he would educate some of his colleagues about the importance of these safeguards and why they exist in democracies.
The honourable member from Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, listening to the Attorney General, you would almost think that the Liberals believe they have a charter right to line the pockets of Liberal insiders, Mr. Speaker. This is at a time when Canadians are lining up at food banks, when people cannot afford their mortgages, they cannot find a house, and yet Liberals line pockets of Liberal insiders. This is so on brand for Liberals. It's like they're entitled to their entitlements. Mr. Speaker, when will this Liberal government end the entitlement for Liberal insiders, hand over the documents unredacted so that Canadians and police can know the truth?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, there's a qualitative difference between providing documents for the purposes of Parliament and providing documents for the purposes of prosecution. The second you cross that line, you need to impose the protections that the Charter provides. That's what that document represents. Most Canadians get behind that document, save for my Conservative colleagues. The reason why the safeguards are important is because they protect things like privacy, your freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Again, fundamental precepts that member knows full well because he used to practice in this area. I just wish he could educate his colleagues about why we need to safeguard important charter rights.
Colleagues. The honourable member from Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up. The Green Slush Fund is more proof that the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, crime or corruption. They have violated a House order to cover up for their friends. This $400 million Liberal scandal has paralyzed Parliament, making it impossible to address the Prime Minister's agenda of crime and chaos. Will the NDP Liberals end the cover-up, give proof to the police, so Parliament can get working for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, talking about working for Canadians. Now Canadians are what we're seeing. Conservative blocking conservative motion, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine that? We live in a parallel world in this place. The Conservative are blocking their own motion, Mr. Speaker. What we did and we promised the Canadian was to get to the bottom of this, Mr. Speaker. There'll be 4 independent reports, Mr. Speaker, including the Auditor General, including the Commissioner of the RCMP. We said he has all the documents, Mr. Speaker. Not only the board resigned, the CEO resigned, the integrity of the foundation has been transferred. Mr. Speaker, we uphold the highest standard in this House.
Colleagues, the honourable member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect their government to do more when it comes to the climate crisis, but the Liberals are so far deep in the pockets of Canada's worst polluters that they plan to label fossil fuels as sustainable. They are caving to the interests of big banks and big oil instead of protecting Canadians. Oil and gas profits are going up. Their emissions are going up, and they want to greenwash fossil fuels. Why are the Liberals helping them?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will quote a colleague from Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. I quote, "This is why, as a New Democrat, as a progressive, as an environmentalist, We are in favor of putting a price on pollution. We support taxing carbon, which already happens in the majority of Canadian provinces. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we're not caving to pressure and disinformation campaign by the Conservative Party of Canada. It's unfortunate that the NDP doesn't seem to be progressive anymore or environmentalist anymore.
The honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, nothing but excuses from these Liberals, including abortion. They are failing to stand up to Conservative premiers because they will not enforce the Canada Health Act, including Alberta's premier, who is leasing hospitals to Covenant House, which provides emergency contraceptives and abortion services. The Women's Health Coalition says this jeopardizes reproductive rights. Will the minister stand up to Conservative premiers, enforce the Canada Health Act, and uphold abortion care as health care?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Abortion care is health care. Making sure that a woman has access to an abortion service is essential medicine, and we believe in this on this side of the House. We fight for it every day. But let me go a step further. It's also essential that every woman in this country gets access to the contraceptives they need to have control over their body. And if you're against abortion and you're against contraception and you're against sexual education, then I'm sorry, you're against women's freedom altogether. And on this side of the House, we're going to make sure every woman gets the sexual and reproductive tools and support that she needs to have true freedom, Mr. Speaker.
Can you define a woman?
The honourable member from Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, buying a home is one of the biggest decisions that a Canadian can make in their lifetime. Unfortunately, high mortgage costs can be barriers to many, particularly the younger generation seeking to purchase their first home. Our government has made some of the boldest mortgage reform changes in decades to ensure that younger Canadians can turn home buying into a reality. Can the Minister of Finance explain to this House how the adjustments to the mortgage amortization period will enhance and improve access to homes for thousands of Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague from Kitchener
Brace your ears.
for the question and for giving me the chance to talk about the important measures that we have recently announced to help young Canadians achieve their dream of home ownership. We've announced for first-time home buyers amortizations of 30 years and 30-year amortizations for all Canadians buying new builds. Not only will this put the dream of home ownership in reach for more young Canadians, it will help get more homes built faster. That's good news for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Conflict of Interest Act is clear. A minister shall not be involved in the operations of a business while in cabinet. Text messages indicate that someone named Randy at the minister from Edmonton's shady company was involved in its business operations, including an alleged $500,000 fraud. No one from the company named Randy can be identified except the minister, and everyone knows why. Will the minister finally fess up and just admit he broke the law?
I'm sorry, but that was kind of funny. Just out of nowhere. Someone named Randy who worked at this company, an alleged $500,000. Like, what are we doing here?
To committee, they need to share information that is asked for them by the committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, the minister seems to be in hiding. The fact is that it is no coincidence that after months of inquiry, there is no other Randy that can be identified but the minister. And
Randy is a mystery man. He does not exist.
Admitted the only Randy ever connected to the shady company is the minister. So again, will the minister stand in his place, fess up, admit he broke the law, and better yet, resign?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have said, if a witness is called before committee, they are expected to provide the information asked of them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Sturgeon Lake,
She's just giving NPC AI answers.
Randy, it's a question that has gripped the nation.
Who is Randy?
We have yet to receive
a truthful answer. Text messages reveal that the Minister of
Where
Employment's
is Randy?
fraudulent
Damn
business
it.
partner was working with Randy to shake down a medical supply company. The texts show that Randy was in Vancouver the same day as the Minister of Employment was there attending a cabinet retreat. The minister denied speaking with his partner. He claimed he didn't even have his phone, but now he admits that he did text and call his partner. So will the minister stand up and admit that he's been Randy all along?
Oh, the Randy scandal.
Colleagues,
What the actual, what is going on right now?
in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we have stated all along, that if a witness is called to committee and asked to provide information, they need to provide that information to committee. Thank you.
That's right.
The honourable member from
Just given the same answer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Employment denied being Randy. He claimed he had no business dealings with his fraud-ridden business partner. He said he never even spoke to him in Vancouver while he was at the cabinet retreat. He said it was impossible. But after handing over his phone to the Ethics Commissioner, he finally admitted that he did text and call his business partner while at the cabinet retreat in Vancouver. The minister concealed the truth from Parliament for months, and only after getting caught did he admit his actions. Now the Speaker has even found his business partner in contempt of Parliament. The minister has had all summer to reveal the real Randy. Will he stand up and reveal himself today?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have said and reiterate, that as a witness is called to committee and if they are asked to provide information to that committee, we expect they provide that information. Thank you. That's right.
Here we go again.
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
The honourable member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker. Whistleblowers
Randy is a
who have
ghost. Randy
courage
does
to
not
report wrongdoing in
exist.
the federal government
Where
have to wait
is
3
Randy?
years, not for an investigation to be concluded, but for one to even be started. Imagine just how reluctant this makes people to blow the whistle. And imagine how this affects the public's confidence at a time when the federal government is knee-deep in scandals like ArriveCan and SDTC. The Public Sector Integrity Commissioner is asking for the resources that she needs to process whistleblowing in a timely manner. Will the government immediately give the commissioner these resources?
The honourable President.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, my office is working with the Commissioner's office to address funding concerns and resource concerns. Protecting whistleblowers is absolutely a priority, a top priority for our government. We have brought about many improvements to the process. So, Mr. Speaker, whistleblowers play a critical role in our democracy, and we are here to support them. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, consider this. While the federal government is embroiled in various scandals, there are 161 whistleblower complaints that have yet to be processed. 161 complaints related either to wrongdoing or to reprisals against whistleblowers. The government must increase the commissioner's budget.
Oh, Freeland is there. She spoke a few times.
Whistleblowers are protected, which is a reminder that Bill C-290, which passed unanimously in this House, has not yet made it through the Senate.
And that woman in the back there in the pink suit for the block looks like she has not slept in days. And she always looks like that.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, first of all, as I said, my office is working with the Integrity Commissioner's office. We are working together to address these issues. We supported the bill that my colleague just mentioned. I hope that all senators will also support the bill. There is an external working group as well, which is studying revisions to the Whistleblower Protection Act, and we support whistleblowers.
From Hastings, Lennox, and Addington.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, crime is up, cost is up, time is up, Mr. Speaker. The NDP Liberal carbon tax is driving up the cost of food, adding to an already terrible food insecurity crisis. It has gotten so bad, doctors are being told to be on the lookout for scurvy, That's right, scurvy. Not only are many Canadians grasping at their grocery bills in advance of Thanksgiving dinner, our medical professionals are concerned about the return of a centuries-old disease. Mr. Speaker, how is this Prime Minister so stubbornly convinced on his carbon tax?
Yep, just another Liberal scandal for the list.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, what won't help somebody facing food insecurity in this country that's caused by a global crisis and rising food costs, it's cutting the rebate check. That's what the Conservatives would do. I talked to an individual, Bob, today. He's a senior who, with the Canadian Dental Care Plan, just saved $3,000 on essential care that he needed, talking to me about what that meant for his family and their ability to afford food. That would be cancelled by the Conservatives. All the Conservatives have are slogans, and we saw what that did. Fake lakes, gazebos, rubber checks, because they're going to go from slogans to try to win an election to slogans to explain why they're not doing anything for anybody. We're not going to allow that to happen.
The Honourable Member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While sunny days are over, everyone should be concerned when leading medical publications are raising the alarm bells about scurvy in Canada in 2024. This disease was an issue 400 years ago. The cost of the carbon tax on food pricing is real. Limited access to adequate food caused by this increase is real. And lastly, the negative effects on the health of Canadians is real. Mr. Speaker, will the government axe the tax to lower the cost of food so that Canadians can once and again enjoy an affordable family Thanksgiving dinner?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
You know what's back after decades of being gone? Tuberculosis, measles, misinformation that is being spread around things like vaccines and about public health is doing insane damage to people. And I'll tell you, if you care about food insecurity in this world, then you should be supporting a school food program. If you care about food insecurity, then you should be helping families lift up, not giving them empty slogans with nothing behind them. Mr. Speaker, we face difficult times in this world right now. This requires serious and real conversations. That's what we're centered on. That's what we think about. That's the solutions that we offer.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, everything is more expensive thanks to the Bloc Liberal coalition. The price of housing, the price of gas, but most of all, the price of food, which has shot up 22% since 2021. The food banks in my riding of Beauce barely have enough food to feed families in the region. But the Bloc Québécois continues to support this government, which has impoverished Quebecers. Families are really struggling. They need help as soon as possible. When will this government listen to Canadians and call an election? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have great respect for my colleague. My colleague is talking about Canadians and Quebecers who are struggling, but the Conservative leader's solution would be to penalize them, to harm them by cutting benefits that they need. Even for people in the colleague's riding, they would also cut the school food program, which would help children in his riding who arrive at school in the morning with empty stomachs. Because according to the Conservative leader, feeding school children is just bureaucracy. The Honourable Member for Madawaska, Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, in all of my conversations with students, scientists, researchers, one thing is very clear. The solutions to many of the world's problems can be found through science and research. From the Arctic to climate change to food science and beyond, can the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry inform this House of the work our government is doing to support scientists? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for his great work. Indeed, when we invest in science and research, everyone wins, Mr. Speaker. That's why earlier this year, in the budget, we announced an investment of $800 million through the Strategic Science Fund for 24 Canadian organizations working to solve some of the world's most significant challenges. And more recently, and everyone should be thrilled about this, Canada signed an agreement with the European Union's Horizon Europe program. This means that our researchers, scientists, and students will collaborate with their counterparts in Europe. Let's be ambitious, let's make this a priority, and let's make Canada a true leader in research and science.
Kent and Middlesex.
Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. And you know what else is up? The number of kids needing to use a food bank. The London Food Bank is already helping over 16,000 people every month, and more post-secondary students are going hungry. Thanksgiving is this weekend and many families will be going without. Why? Because the cost of the carbon tax is making food too expensive. So if this Prime Minister is so convinced on his carbon tax, why won't he call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we all suffer when some of our fellow Canadians are suffering. And we've made some historic investments, Mr. Speaker, including in 2016 when we brought in the Canada Child Benefit, which is providing support to over 4.3 million families each and every month, Mr. Speaker, an allowance that goes in their bank account every month to help with those basics, Mr. Speaker. This is how we are fighting for and supporting Canadian families, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Mr. Speaker, of course the Laurentian elites wouldn't understand. They don't know what it's like to be a parent living paycheck to paycheck, trying to feed their families. Constant NDP Liberal tax hikes and inflationary spending means that 1 million Ontarians had to use a food bank last year because they couldn't afford to buy food. In Middlesex, London, that means that 23,000 kids are going hungry. What parents really want is to give their kids a good Thanksgiving. So will the Prime Minister give Canadians what they want and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're focused on fighting for Canadian families. What does that mean, Mr. Speaker? That means making $1 billion commitment to families and children across this country to bring forward a school food program, Mr. Speaker, that will feed over 400,000 children each and every year. We've already seen progress with Newfoundland and Labrador on board and putting this forward in their schools. I look forward to more provinces and territories signing on so we can ensure kids have food at school.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, young Canadians and Quebecers are suffering. The sky-high cost of living is driving people to despair all over the country. 1.3 million Quebecers are experiencing food insecurity. And they're struggling to find a job, too. In a country like Canada, that's a disgrace. Quebecers have had enough of this centralizing, inflationary Liberal government, but the Bloc Québécois is still insisting on keeping them in power. It's unbelievable. Young people need jobs and housing. Can the Bloc Québécois give young Quebecers a break and stop supporting this Liberal Prime Minister who is ruthlessly impoverishing them? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ruthless? You know what's ruthless? Conservative policy toward Quebec's families and young Quebecers. He should bring his party leader with him. He says it's bureaucratic to help people to give food to children at schools, children who arrive in the morning with empty bellies. In fact, what about in the members' riding? We need an explanation about why it's bureaucratic to help hungry children.
Member from St. John's East.
In 2012, the Conservative Prime Minister traveled to the World Economic Forum in Davos to announce their plan to raise the retirement age to 67. Their plan, supported by the Leader of the Opposition, would have taken away OAS from 1 million Canadian seniors who turn 65 this year. Can the Minister of Seniors share how the government has defended Canadians' right to retire at 65 and what further supports for seniors is at risk of Conservative cuts?
The Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to my colleague, the chair of our Seniors Caucus. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' World Economic Forum agenda tried to turn Canadians' 2 best years of retirement into their 2 worst years of work by raising the retirement age to 67.
Shameful.
We reversed it.
That's right.
Their World Economic Forum wish list would cut a $1,000 increase to the GIS that helps nearly 1 million seniors. It would cut rent relief for vulnerable seniors and will kick 2.5 million seniors off the Canadian Dental Care Plan. The World Economic Forum agenda will not pass, Mr. Speaker.
Colleagues.
Even your colleagues don't believe you.
The honourable member from Courtenay, Alberni.
That one was loud and clear.
For 3 years, the Liberals have allowed a company in Union Bay to break apart a massive ship in the high tide zone without being in a self-contained floating dry dock. This is despite objections of the province, local communities, and First Nations. Nowhere in the world would this unregulated chaos be allowed to take place. A recent provincial inspection found the operations are discharging effluent more than 100 times the limit for copper and more than 13 times the limit for zinc. What will it finally take for the federal government to step in and put an end to this dangerous, unregulated shipbreaking?
You guys are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. I try to cover question period as much as I can.
There's a federal responsibility, but there's also a provincial responsibility. And there is a responsibility to collaborate on every piece of what the member opposite talked about. We're going to continue to uphold our end on the DFO side. We ask the province to do the same. Yes.
The honourable member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, today is the first anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel. On that horrific day, Hamas killed over 1,200 people, including 8 Canadians and over 200 taken hostage. At home, in 1 year, there's been nearly 5,800 incidents of hatred and anti-Semitism, including Samadoun posters today for a Toronto event under the heading Long Live October 7. Mr. Speaker, the government's pathetic condemnation of Hamas with no action on domestic pro-Hamas supporters does nothing to end violence and intimidation. Will the government give up its veiled support for terrorist sympathizers? The safety of our citizens is the only priority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I'll agree with one thing that independent member just said. The safety of our citizens is the only priority. That's why we have a national action plan to combat hatred. That's why we have a bill on the legislature floor right now, Bill C-63, that would target online radicalization that leads to anti-Semitism. How does somebody get to the point where they're targeting a Jewish day school, a Jewish daycare, or a Jewish synagogue? Because they are radicalized online. That same bill has augmentation of penalties for willful promotion of anti-Semitism, public incitement of hatred, and advocating genocide. That's a bill that not every party in this chamber supports, and that's what we need to get behind.
He's in France because he's on another multi-million-dollar vacation.
Chers collègues, à la suite de discussions.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House,
Greg is giving people the business.
That there is consent for a moment of silence to be observed for
never mind.
victims of the attack in Israel 1 year ago.
I thought he was giving people shit.
To observe a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the attack in Israel that happened a year ago. I now invite honourable members to rise. J'invite les honorables députés à se lever.
Well, they had the PPC at one point, but that kind of went away pretty quickly. So, how's everybody doing on this fine day? Yeah, a moment of silence for losing Canada to corruption. Just another day in the life of being a Canadian. The government bending you over, saying they're going to do something.
Colleagues, before I get to points of order. One moment, please. Colleagues, as I said during question period, there's a matter to which I would like to return. After reviewing the transcript, in one of his questions, the Leader of the Opposition used language that was very similar to language which was found unparliamentary in the past.
Oh my God.
Earlier this year, a member accused the Leader of the Opposition of pandering to a regime I think most of us would find odious. That member was asked to withdraw that comment. In his question today, the Leader of the Opposition accused the Minister of Foreign Affairs of something similar. As I have said before, there are ways to make our points without resorting to these types of comments. I would ask that the Leader of the Opposition withdraw his comment at the earliest opportunity.
What in the fuck is this shit, man? Come on. What are we doing here?
I now understand the honourable member. Oh, sorry. Point of order.
The country is collapsing under us, and we're worried about
Mr. Speaker,
comments made from.
One of the concerns that we've expressed in the past, and it's
this is
related to what it
ridiculous,
is
man.
that you just finished ruling out the Leader of the official opposition, and we support your statement, Mr. Speaker, but we want to make it clear in terms of ensuring that all members are treated equally, and that the Leader of the Conservative Party not be allowed to speak until he's actually given a formal apology.
This guy, Greg, man, he is probably the most corrupt out of all of them.
The chair has already mentioned, as I just made in my declaration, and I think that addresses the points, and I'd invite all members, if they have questions, to read that. The honourable member from Thornhill is seeking unanimous consent.
Today marks the first and extremely dark anniversary of October 7th, when terrorists carried out the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And after consultation with parties, if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that this House unequivocally reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself from the terrorists who attack it, expresses support for the victims of October 7th and their families and the people of Israel, that calls for the immediate release of the 101 hostages still being held captive, condemns the grotesque rise in anti-Semitism and hate towards Jews in Canada over the past year, and condemns Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist entities which must be eliminated. Thank you.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. Point of order. The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On September 26, the Speaker said the following in the House: "The House has clearly ordered the production of certain documents, and that order has clearly not been fully complied with." You then went on to say that you cannot come to any other conclusion but then to find a prima facie question of privilege has been established. I'd like to table the...
I think the honourable member is moving into debate. It being 3:17, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion to concur in the 20th report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the status of persons with disabilities. Comme il est 15h17.
It being 3:17, the House will now proceed to the vote to adopt the 20th report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the status of persons with disabilities. Call in the members.
All right, I just want to thank everybody for joining me on this interesting day of question period. If you are new here, make sure you hit that sub button and you hit that like button. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I was only half paying attention. I'm reading the chat, reading what you guys have been saying and what you guys have been up to. We'll see what's going on here very soon.
Sierra?
Yeah, and it's most likely more than $400 million too. That's kind of the crazy thing.
Et la suivante. Ms. Zerillo, seconded by Ms. Barron, moved that the 20th report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the status of persons with disabilities presented on Wednesday, May 8th, 2024, be concurred in. The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person. All those in favour of the motion will please rise.
Miss Ing.
Ms. Ing.
Monsieur Duclos.
Monsieur Duclos.
Miss Hutchins.
Ms. Hutchins.
Miss Tassie.
Ms. Tassie.
Miss Suds.
Ms. Suds.
Miss Murray.
Ms. Murray.
Miss Grohl.
Ms. Grohl.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. McGinty.
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Vandal.
Monsieur Vandal.
Miss Cara.
Miss Cara.
Madame Saint-Onge.
Madame Saint-Onge.
Miss
Qualtrough.
Miss Sahota.
Miss Sahota.
Miss Ian.
Miss Ian.
Madame Bibot.
Madame Bibot.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Mr. Hernandez Sangare.
Mr. Hernandez Sangare.
Mrs. Valdez.
Mrs. Valdez.
Miss Jazik.
Miss Jazik.
Mr. Dollywall.
Mr. Dollywall.
Madame Lalonde.
Madame Lalonde.
Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Sheehan.
Miss O'Connell.
Ms. O'Connell.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Madame Fortier.
Madame Fortier.
Mr. Fragiscatos.
Mr. Fragiscatos.
Mr. Biddle.
Mr. Biddle.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Monsieur Lauzon.
Mr. May Cambridge.
Mr. May Cambridge.
Mr. Assassi.
Mr. Assassi.
Monsieur El Khoury.
Monsieur El Khoury.
Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Fonseca.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Johari.
Mr. Johari.
Monsieur Lightbound.
Monsieur Lightbound.
Mr. Nagvi.
Mr. Nagvi.
Mr. Sidhu Brampton East.
Mr. Cedar Brampton East.
Mr. Badaway.
Mr. Badaway.
Mr. Sarai.
Mr. Sarai.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Madame Brière.
Madame Brière.
Mr. Long.
Mr. Long.
Mr. McDonald Avalon.
Mr. McDonald Avalon.
Mr. McKinnon Coquitlam Port Coquitlam.
Mr. McKinnon Coquitlam Port Coquitlam.
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Morrissey.
Mr. Morrissey.
Monsieur Robillard.
Monsieur Robillard.
Madame Shanahan.
Madame Shanahan.
Yes, believe in only what the government tells you.
Rogers.
Mr. Rogers.
Miss Yip.
Miss Yip.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Lewis Kitchener Conestoga.
Mr. Lewis Kitchener Conestoga.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Mr. Baines.
Mr. Baines.
Miss Bradford.
Miss Bradford.
Mr. Shahal.
Mr. Shahal.
Madame Chatel.
Madame Chatel.
Mr. Koto.
Mr. Koto.
Mr. Henley.
Mr. Hanley.
Miss Kayabaga.
Miss Kayabaga.
Mr. Meow.
Mr. Meow.
Miss Taylor Roy.
Miss Taylor Roy.
Miss Thompson.
Miss Thompson.
Mr. Shear.
Mr. Shear.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Brock.
Mr. Brock.
Monsieur Deltel.
Monsieur Deltel.
Mrs. Stubbs.
Mrs. Stubbs.
Miss Lanceman.
Miss Lanceman.
Miss Lewis Haldeman Norfolk.
Miss Lewis Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Barrett.
Mrs. Gray.
Mrs. Gray.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Kimmich.
Mr. Kimmich.
Mr. Jennis.
Mr. Jennis.
Mr. Small.
Mr. Small.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Berthold.
Monsieur Berthold.
Mr. Workington.
Mr. Workington.
Mr. Chong.
Mr. Chong.
Mr. Abultayev.
Mr. Abultayev.
Mrs. Kuzi.
Mrs. Kuzi.
Mr. Seaback.
Mr. Seaback.
Miss Ferrari.
Miss Ferrari.
Mr. Stewart Miramichi Grand Lake.
Mr. Stewart Miramichi Grand Lake.
Mr. Viss.
Mr. Viss.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd.
Monsieur Brassard.
Mr. Brassard.
Mrs. Goodridge.
Mrs. Goodridge.
Monsieur Godin.
Monsieur Godin.
Mr. Hoback.
Mr. Hoback.
Mrs. Roberts.
Mrs. Roberts.
Mr. Melillo.
Mr. Melillo.
Ms. Gladue.
Ms. Gladue.
Mrs. Cramp Nyman.
Mrs. Cramp Nyman.
Madame Vienne.
I was just thinking, you know who I didn't see today, or that I guess isn't here, other than Trudeau, on his multi-million-dollar vacation in France? I didn't see Jagmeet today. I wonder what big angry Jagmeet's up to.
It's rude.
Monsieur Lou.
Monsieur Lou.
Monsieur Généreux.
Monsieur Généreux.
Mr. Genereux.
Mr. Genereux.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Major.
Mr. Major.
Mr. Davidson.
Mr. Davidson.
Monsieur Martel.
Monsieur Martel.
Monsieur Gould.
Monsieur Gould.
Mr. Caputo.
Mr. Caputo.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Epp.
Mr. Zimmer.
Mr. Zimmer.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Mr. Cram.
Mr. Cram.
Mrs. Wagenthal.
Mrs. Wagenthal.
Mr. Albus.
Mr. Albus.
Mr. Bragdon.
Mr. Bragdon.
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Nader.
Mrs. Falk Battleford Lloydminster.
Mrs. Falk Battleford Lloydminster.
Mr. McLean.
Mr. McLean.
Mr. McGuire.
Mr. McGuire.
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Shields.
Mr. Shields.
Mr. Falk Provencher.
Mr. Falk Provencher.
Mr. Mott.
Mr. Motts.
Mr. Williamson.
Mr. Williamson.
Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Arnold.
Monsieur d'Entremont.
Monsieur d'Entremont.
Jagmeet's at the nearest Royal Rumble, just taking on everybody.
Perry.
Mr. Carey.
Mr. Dowdle.
Mr. Dowdle.
Mr. Vierson.
Mr. Vierson.
Mr. Fast.
Mr. Fast.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Kitchen.
Mr. Giovanni.
Mr. Giovanni.
Mr. Stewart, Toronto, St. Paul's.
Mr. Stewart, Toronto, St. Paul's.
Monsieur Terrien.
Monsieur Terrien.
Monsieur Simard.
Monsieur Simard.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame Michaud.
Madame Michaud.
He's jagging off. Yes, he is.
Beaulieu.
Thériault.
Oh, correction, Monsieur
Thériault.
Thériault.
Monsieur Thériault.
Madame Larouche.
Madame Larouche.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Monsieur Plamondon.
Madame Saint-Clair de Gagné.
Madame Saint-Clair de Gagné.
Madame Desbiens.
Madame Desbiens.
Madame Bérubé.
Madame Bérubé.
Monsieur Désilet.
Monsieur Désilet.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Massey.
Miss Matheson.
Miss Matheson.
Miss McPherson.
Miss McPherson.
Miss Idlout.
Miss Idlout.
Miss Gazan.
Miss Gazan.
Mr. McGregor.
Mr. McGregor.
Miss Dance.
Miss Dance.
Mr. Cannings.
Mr. Cannings.
Mr. Angus.
Mr. Angus.
Mr. Desjarlais.
Mr. Desjarlais.
Miss Zerillo.
Miss Zerillo.
Miss Kwan.
Miss Kwan.
Miss May, Saanich Gulf Islands.
Miss May, Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Morris.
Mr. Morris.
Que tous ceux qui s'opposent
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
la Chambre attendra.
The House will now wait for the electronic voting period to end before resuming its proceedings.
Yeah, fucking Jagmeet's just waiting for, he's waiting for his pension to arrive. Alright, we're gonna see. We got 4 minutes for this vote. Let's see who's voting here. You get to see the corruption at its finest. Face by face. Honorable member laughing my ass off. Might be at the bank looking for a new loan. Yeah, the NDP is not looking too good as a party right now. They are collapsing under themselves, and I bet that probably is playing a massive part into Jagmeet's temper and why he's lashing out as often as he has been. It's kind of a scary thought when you think he wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, and he can't even take being called corrupt. He lashes out. He freaks out. He can't even control himself. It's very sad. Sad and it's scary, right? Like that's stuff you got to think about. These people want to lead the country. They want to go and talk to other world leaders. Making international deals or domestic, whatever the case is. Talking to premiers of each province. And he's freaking out like a child. Or at least he did. He did multiple times. A few weeks ago. They are voting for a disability benefit, I believe. I believe that is what is going on here. Committee on Human Resources, Skills, and Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. If they're all voting, yeah, it must be a pay increase. Yeah, it looks like across the board, every single person has voted yes. Oh, there's Trudeau. Doesn't show up to work, but is still voting yes. RCMP needs to investigate every dime that was spent. Check every contract with consultants billions of dollars. Completely Arrive Can. Oh my god, the Arrive scam app. Yeah, that's another bad one as well. I guess that's going to do it for that. We don't get to see the ending here unless I can pull it up on the CPAC website. Yes, I can. Here it is. Gotta mute that music because I got hit with copyright last time. That was lovely. Follow the money. Yeah, that's what most politicians will do at the end of the day. That's what Jagmeet's doing. Could have had that vote, could have had that election, but he wants his multi-million-dollar pension.
I wish to inform the House that the electronic voting period has ended. If members were not able to vote due to technical difficulties, they may now use the raise hand function and the chair will recognize them.
Mr. Richards.
I vote yes. Mr. Richards, yay pour.
Ms. Haidu.
I vote yes.
Ms. Haidu, yay pour.
She looked
Madame
fucking
Posey.
miserable.
En faveur.
Madame Posey, yay pour.
Monsieur Sauvé. Monsieur Sauvé, est-ce que votre micro est ouvert?
Yep, the Arrive scam app. Another multi-million-dollar Trudeau scandal.
Oui, 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 pour, je vote pour.
Monsieur Sauvé, yay pour.
Le bureau va maintenant...
The table will now compile the results of the vote.
Yeas pour 327, 327. Nays contre, 0, aucun.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
I declare the motion carried.
Now recognize
Yeah, every single person voted.
the room quietly.
It's like Oprah showed up and said, if you look under your seat, everybody, there's a fat paycheck waiting for you. Just vote yes.
On a question of privilege arising from some very disturbing events which occurred just outside this place over the weekend. On Saturday, the Parliamentary Protective Service, for which you are responsible for and provide policy direction to, imposed an ideological test for entry on the grounds of Parliament Hill. According to a video posted online, a visitor is seen being denied access because he was not, quote, not a supporter of Palestine and doesn't recognize a Palestinian state. The visitor, of course, was denied access to Parliament Hill for the sole reason that he didn't hold a political opinion considered acceptable to whoever approved this requirement for entry. And to my knowledge, that's the first time that access to Parliament has been subjected to a screening with political points of view, at least documented as such. Parliament is the beating heart of Canadian democracy, and it is where Canadians often come to exercise one of the most cherished constitutional rights guaranteed to them under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and freedom of expression. So to cherry-pick that point of view as expressed on Parliament Hill is simply not consistent with Canadian values. So now it should be made clear, though, that this is in no way directed at the officer, but the question, the policy direction that you, the Speaker, are responsible for. It should also be made clear that the very fact that anyone cannot access Parliament Hill because of an opinion they hold, or worse, they cannot be trusted to be in the same place as someone who holds an entirely different opinion, is a stain on the state of our country and the divisiveness that has been allowed to fester here. And it's a country that's seen hate crimes rise 250% since 2015. A country that has seen lawlessness and the mob rule our streets. Two groups of people who have opposing views cannot enter at the same time to express those views in one place. What has become of this country? Conservatives believe that Parliament Hill must be safe and secure while remaining open and accessible to all, including those peacefully protesting. All points of view from all Canadians should be heard. That is their constitutional right, regardless of whether they are politically fashionable amongst the elites. The litmus test about recognizing a Palestinian state as the key to enter, in fact, is also the position of the Government of Canada and many of the Canadian allies, so I'm not sure what that was all about. Had Conservative members of Parliament sought to access the House of Commons our place of work on Saturday would have been denied access because we would not or could not have satisfied that ideological test, even though members are free to access the parliamentary precinct, and that is a well-established privilege of Parliament. The House of Commons Procedure and Practice, the third edition, explains it on page 107 that, quote, in order to fulfill their parliamentary duties, members should be able to go about their parliamentary business undisturbed. And continuing on page 110, Boscan-Gagnon write, quote, incidents involving physical obstruction such as traffic barriers, security cordons, and union picket lines, either impeding members' access to the parliamentary precinct or blocking their free movement within the precinct, as well as occurrences of physical assault, have been found to be prima facie in a case of privilege. So, as also explained on paragraph 15 of the 66th report of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs tabled in April of 1999, quote, one of the privileges of members of this House of Commons is the right to unimpeded access to Parliament and the parliamentary.
The CPAC channel never has their chat up or open. I think they always have it shut off.
To at least the early.
But yeah, they probably couldn't handle people talking in there. They didn't want people giving their opinion on the government. Shocking.
It is based on the preeminent right of the House to attendance and to the service of its members. Any obstruction of members constitutes a breach of privilege and the contempt of the House, end quote. The point was repeated in the same committee's 26th report tabled in May of 2012, quote, as a part of parliamentary privilege, members of this House of Commons have the right of unimpeded and unfettered access to the parliamentary precincts and are entitled to go about their parliamentary duties and functions undisturbed without any form of interference, end quote. Joseph Mangot makes the simple point that in his parliamentary privilege in Canada's second edition at page 176 that, quote, no impediment should be placed on the member in going about his parliamentary business, whether in the House or on the way to the House or while on his way home. Further down on the same page, he wrote, quote, since Parliament Hill has always been a public place restricting the movement of the general public on grounds we would probably be considered excessive, end quote. To punctuate that point, he added a footnote, footnote 47, which reads, quote, there is little, if any, restriction on the grounds of Parliament Hill, even during the 1970 October crisis, end quote. Shortly following Pierre Trudeau's invocation of the War Measures Act, the former Standing Committee on Procedure and Organization recommended in its second report presented to this House in March 1971, quote, your committee believes the main problem in connection with security on Parliament is to strike reasonable balance between the importance of allowing the public ready access to the House of Commons on one hand and the necessity of preserving the security of the House on the other. Your committee was governed at all times by the belief that Parliament should not be isolated from the people as a result of exaggerated security measures, and that it is important in a democratic society that members of Parliament should continue to have direct communications with the public. Consequently, your committee has conducted that whatever security measures are provided, it must be reasonable and consistent with the right of the public to come to Parliament. It's not easy to reconcile these two imperatives, but your committee feels that the balance should always be in favor of permitting the public reasonable and proper access to Parliament without intruding on in any obvious way on the undoubted rights of citizens to approach Parliament, end quote. That just sounds like common sense to me, Mr. Speaker. The Canadians who elect us have a right to come to Parliament and make their voices heard, and yet it seems that they've been chucked out the window in favor of a shocking news that ideological purity tests are now needed to access Parliament Hill, a very high impediment that is being imposed. And in short, the ideological test that Conservative MPs and some even Liberal MPs and many, many Canadians in this case would fail to pass, blocking politicians, especially opposition politicians, from accessing the legislature, which they were elected to plainly represent their constituents, is undemocratic and un-Canadian. And it's the sort of thing that dictatorships do, Mr. Speaker. So to be sure, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to lay any blame on the constable who was seen in the video. Indeed, I don't hold any single frontline member of the service responsible. They would have simply been following directions decided much higher up. Conjuring up political ideological tests for accessing Parliament is not something you would expect any single constable to have simply freelanced. So it certainly comes from somewhere. Subsection 79.52 of Parliament of Canada Act explains that, quote, the Speaker and the Senate and of the Senate and the Speaker of the House are, as custodians of powers, of privileges, rights, and immunities for their respective House and of members of those Houses responsible for services, end quote. You, sir, are responsible for that service. And subsection 79.54 of the same Act adds, quote, the Director shall lead the integrated security operations throughout the parliamentary precinct and Parliament Hill under the joint general policy direction of the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, end quote. And beyond the matter of any policy directions that you may or may not have given, it is important to understand that Section 79.55 of the Act vests responsibility for, quote, the physical security services throughout the parliamentary precinct of Parliament Hill delivered by the PPS, the RCMP, and the RCMP. In fact, the Director of the PPS is required by subsection 79.56 of the Act to be a member of the RCMP. Subsection 5 of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act makes quite clear that the Liberal Cabinet appoints the RCMP's top boss and the Commissioner, quote, who under the direction of the Minister has control and management of the force and all matters connected to the force, end quote. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, this boils down to one essential question. Was the direction to require the Parliamentary Protective Service to apply a political litmus test to anyone seeking access to Parliament Hill this past weekend a general policy direction which you approved, or was it the direction of the Minister of Public Safety in relation to his control of the RCMP, which is responsible for physical security of the Hill? No matter how you cut it, which Liberal made the decision of ideological tests of political points of view are shocking and unacceptable and an impediment to members of Parliament who must have free and ready access to the parliamentary precinct at all times, not to mention all Canadians that should be able to come on the Hill at all times on all issues. Should you agree, Mr. Speaker, that this is a prima facie case of privilege, I intend to move a motion to refer this matter to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee for investigation. By allowing for this issue to be studied in committee, it will allow for those key questions to be answered. Who gave the directive? Was it you, Mr. Speaker, or was it the Minister of Public Safety who approved this ideological tests for Parliament Hill access, and whether ideological tests have been approved in Hill access before this time? These are very important issues. They are very important concerns, and Parliament stands for free speech in its very name. The grounds which surround our building ought to stand equally for free speech and not a safe speech bubble, or for some speech, or for acceptable speech, even worse, and reserved only for those opinions that are shared with the government or shared with elites or fashionable at the time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
God damn. That was a lot.
Member for her intervention. I see that the honourable member from New Westminster Burnaby is rising on his feet on the same matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as our practice, I'm asking for consideration to review the blues and potentially come back in the next day or two on this issue.
And I see that the honourable member from Kingston and the Islands is also rising on a similar matter.
Likewise, Mr. Speaker, we would like the opportunity to review and come back to you in timely fashion.
And I can assure all members, and especially the member from Thornhill who raised this question of privilege, that I look forward to getting back to the House as soon as possible once the other interventions are made.
So a whole lot of nothing, huh?
It's not because of the deferred recorded divisions. Government orders will be extended by 12 minutes. Alors, je désire informer la Chambre qu'en raison du...
I wish to inform the House that due to the recorded division,
Okay, I think that is going to do it for question period and what I'm going to be covering. I want to thank everybody for stopping by and watching. If you are new to the stream, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that sub button. Hit that notification bell, because I will be live tomorrow, and I will be live pretty much every day this week covering question period. I believe this is the final week for this month, and then we go on a little break. Then it starts up again next month. I'm not 100% sure on that. I would have to check the calendar, but anyway, I will see you guys later. Thank you for stopping by once again. Hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit the notification bell. Have a good one, everybody.
Pursuant to subsection 94(2) of the Access to Information Act and to subsection 72(2)